All right, so thanks for joining us today. We're doing this a little bit differently. I'm on the road today, so we're going to do a fireside chat from San Francisco. I had the pleasure of dropping by the Sysdig office, meet with some of the team, and we're going to talk a little bit about technology, a little bit about Sysdig, a little bit about open source, and lots of other good topics. So maybe you guys can just introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Loris Degioanni. I'm founder and CTO of Sysdig. Sysdig is my second company. My first company was called Case Technologies. It was the commercial entity behind an open source network analyzer called Wireshark. So I've done monitoring and visibility and packets and networks from the whole first part of my career, and then with Sysdig I switched to containers and microservices and Kubernetes and the new world of cloud native applications.
Cool.
And then I'm Knox Anderson. I've done a little bit of everything at Sysdig, been product marketing, customer success. Now I'm focusing on product with Sysdig Secure.
Cool. So having a past with Wireshark obviously gives you some instant credibility into understanding what's going on at the system level. I'm sure everyone that's as old as me has used Wireshark to save our butts once or twice and get some attention from the network team.
Yeah, it's crazy how many people have used and still do use today Wireshark. It's really like a bit of the lingua franca, for networks, and it's a tool that now is like almost 20 years old, but still super useful and still something that pretty much everybody uses.
Yeah, cool. So I'll do we always do these icebreakers a little bit, so we'll hit you with some icebreakers first, and you have to answer quick, don't look at my questions. So what's your favorite Linux distro?
I'm definitely an Ubuntu kind of guy. I run that on my Mac, in addition to macOS.
Yeah. All right. And what about you? Are you a Vim, VI, or Emacs?
Emacs.
All Emacs?
Yeah.
Cool. And YAML or JSON?
Well, I don't know. It depends.
Yeah.
But I like the syntax of JSON a little bit better, being a programmer, but
it's
depends on the use case.
People are starting to say YAML now because they can comment stuff out.
The comment thing is awful. It's brutal. Yeah.
And I've interviewed some people that are big on Go or Python, but what's your favorite programming language?
Again, it really depends because they have in my mind pretty different use cases. Recently, I've used Python quite a bit, mostly because I've done quite a bit of prototyping work, and Python works very well for that. Also, I love the easy of use of Python in like data science and statistics and all that kind of stuff. It's really easy to create like a data science application pretty easily in Python. So recently I've been focused a little bit more on that language, but Go is phenomenal too.
Yeah, it depends. I find nowadays some of the younger people on our team are always asking us what languages to focus on, and Python's always brought up. There's just so many use cases out there, and just so many tools to get people started.
And it never ages, Go is clearly replacing a little bit C++ in system level programming, while Python has its own, use case and niche, and it's a language that is over 30 years old. Probably,
yeah. And what about config management tools? Puppet, Chef, Ansible? Did you dabble with any of those?
Yeah, probably Chef. Is the one where I have a little bit more expertise mostly, I've used it more than that.
Cooking up lots of recipes.
Yeah.
One of the things we've got into a little bit is the whole runtime and the container runtime. Do you see a big change going on with that, with Docker and Cryo coming into the space and the initiatives that are going on with the container initiative?
Yeah, definitely the field which, a few years ago, no one was worrying about this anymore. Rocket was the only experiment other than Docker, to bring something different to the table. Now the whole thing is pretty lively, especially because with Kubernetes becoming the de facto standard in orchestration, then there's an opportunity to have runtimes that are specifically designed and optimized for Kubernetes, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the Cryo idea and the Red Hat approach there is especially that, I mean, something that works well with Kubernetes and with their OpenShift. So it's interesting to see how this will evolve.
That's going to be Knox's problem, having to figure out all these one time. He used to have one test case, he just had to be Docker, and now he's got more things to worry about, I'm sure.
Yeah, what exposes an image ID, what exposes a specific SHA. There's a fat digest also that's available from Docker that can point to many images. So there's a bunch of complexity against each different runtime.
We'll see where all this ends, I guess, right? It's a CI/CD and test cases are very important. You don't want to be clogging this stuff together much longer. What about cloud providers? Is there a certain cloud provider you guys leaning towards these days? Or I guess you got to support everything. So
we love all of them. So we really don't make preferences there, mostly because our customers don't want to make preferences. One of the things that we really make a point as Sysdig is being able to support our customers when they have a multi-cloud strategy, which nowadays, at least our experiences in our customer base, every enterprise of a certain size does have a multi-cloud strategy. And from that point of view, of course, it's important that every single piece in the ecosystem works very well with such a strategy. So yeah, we don't pick.
Well, on-prem too, right? We have a lot of customers
Absolutely.
that started on-prem and then they moved to cloud, so it's nice to be able to use the same tools. You don't have to go and start over with all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Any technology books or podcasts you guys recommend to keep an eye on? Obviously, the Sysdig blog is a good place to get some good information from.
I've been listening to PodCTL a decent amount recently, and they're pretty good, coming out on a weekly basis with different stuff in the community, do really good updates around like what's new in 112, what you need to pay attention to. So highly recommend their podcast.
Cool.
In terms of books, the best one is Running Containers in Production for Dummies, which is actually a small book that Sysdig has published with information to help people get introduced to this subject.
They say that small books are better because they actually mean you know what you're talking about, right?
Well, yeah, let's hope so.
So let's talk. We always kind of start out by talking about open source a little bit. Arctiq's a big open source company. A lot of our go-to tools are open first, and then we help customers kind of pick their subscription model that really going to be used for production, especially with our bigger enterprise customers. They need that insurance model and be able to go back for support. And you guys have been doing lots of stuff in the open source space for a while now. Falco was an open source project. I'd like to talk about the donation you guys just made to the CNCF on that. You have Sysdig as a diagnostics tool. That's an open source tool, and I'm sure a lot of your back-end products or the back-end engine that's running this mountain of data coming in and allowing people to slice and dice it and build dashboards. I'm sure you're not running the big red machine down to 101. So you picked a lot of strategic tools there. Can you guys talk a little bit about how you've used open source to build Sysdig and the product side, and then let's talk about the announcement of the CNCF, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, maybe let me start by talking a little bit about the philosophy, and then we can go into like the announcements and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So from the philosophy point of view, we were talking about OneShare before. We were talking about me coming from packets and network analysis, and definitely. From the beginning, when I started Sysdig, a lot of the philosophy, technical philosophy behind what we do at Sysdig is inspired by that world, but tries to essentially build on top of it and expand it. So the way we instrument machines, VMs, and containers is heavily inspired by packet capture, but instead of packets, we collect the system call layer. So we are able to collect everything ranging from file and disk activity to user activity to inter-process communication to, of course, network activity, which we're very familiar with. And we try to get all of this information and expose it in a way with a workflow that is sort of inspired by OneShare. So our tools take system calls and packetize them, convert them into a stream that is similar to packets, and then we apply, familiar concepts in the packet space like filtering. All of our tools are based on a filtering language that is inspired by the TCP dump one and by the Wireshark one. Our tools are based on the concept of captures, so being able to, when something happens, to take a capture, which includes all of the activity of the system, and then being able to share these captures with your colleagues, exactly like you do with packet captures, right? So on essentially same workflows, or at least the best parts of these workflows that we contributed creating in the previous one where we're operating, apply to the modern world of containers, microservices, and everything that is cloud. At that point, it's pretty natural, like Sysdig, our traditional open source Sysdig tool, is a bit like a TCP dump, right, for the modern world of containers. Sysdig Falco, which is our intrusion detection system, is sort of like your Snort or Pro or Suricata, for your system calls. It allows you to take these streams and apply essentially a rule engine on top of this stream. Sysdig spec, which is a nice, more user-friendly user interface, is like the Wireshark, it's like the user interface on top of it. So even in terms of open source product line, we try to mimic our previous work, but not only because we are attached to it, but also because we found that this was really filling a set of needs that were consistent, we were seeing with the testing in this new world. So,
and for all the propeller heads out there, when I see them, they're going to ask the overhead question, because they're saying, wow, you're getting all this information. I've seen it asked a bunch of times. These guys are doing a really good job to reduce the overhead. I think your goal's always been under 5%, right?
But yeah, exactly, which is the ceiling, so the maximum that we can use. But here and there, that's where our previous experience and our expertise in packets comes into play, because essentially by having spent many years before in our career essentially optimizing packet collection, which is really intense because we really need to run packet capture on a 10 gigabit link, and there's really a lot of tricks that you learn at the operating system level, at the engineering level, to essentially make this very, very efficient. Then the most of the efficiencies comes by taking these lessons and reapplying them to the world of containers and the world of system calls.
Yeah, for sure.
So nothing is ever new in computer science.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The culmination of this is Falco becoming part of CNCF, which we really just announced
5 days ago. So
what made that? I'm sure there was lots of conversations around the office around this thing's already open source. Do we want to support this community? What's the best way to drive this home? How did that come about? Was that across the street at the bar this idea started?
I think we've been kicking it around for
a long time.
9 months to a year, and really, as we've seen what's happened with Prometheus, the question of putting Falco into the CNCF, tying ourselves closer to Prometheus, tying ourselves closer to Kubernetes, tying ourselves closer to Istio, really becomes a no-brainer because of everything that the community can do to make your core technology better. And that's really how we're thinking about building products at Sysdig, is how can we take this open core and then build a bunch of workflows and enhancements on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of a value add, right? So we are all turning to open source. Enterprise customers are turning to open source first. There'll always be great tools out there. There's a couple usually problems. It's just smart people to put them together, or a nice service to be able to consume them. And now people are more comfortable with consuming things as a service. It's a great way to put that polish on top. That's your value. That's the piece people are willing to monitor, willing to pay for. And then you don't get into, you really focus on just doing the right thing for the customer and providing great products. Business model kind of looks after itself. It should anyway.
Absolutely, that's absolutely the case. We're strong believers in that. We're also strong believers that building your foundation on open source components is good for the final user. Is good for the company, building this or the organization building these open source pieces. But it's also good for the whole industry, because these blocks, when they become standard, and again, Prometheus is a very good example. The fact that it's becoming sort of a lingua franca to collect metrics, right? So you don't have this fragmentation of every single component exposing metrics in a different way, but the fact that there's a standard, everybody essentially has agreed on a common way of doing this. This makes every single tool, including our commercial monitoring tools, better, because based on that, there's better quality of metrics, there's better consistency in collection, there's a better agreement on the way you tag, and you report all this kind of stuff. And we're really seeing, this is a benefit for the whole industry and lifts up, everybody in the industry. Our approach with Falco was to be very similar in the security world, right? So Falco puts together the Sysdig collection system that I described before, heavily, inspired by our history with packets, with a very powerful anomaly detection engine, right? And this is all standard, so the rules that you write on top of Falco are going to be standard. The whole industry will be able to use it, and you will be able to share them with other people or with other organizations, and you will be able to bring them with you when you go to your next job, right? So that makes not only Falco a better tool because we get all of this input from the community, but also gives more to the community because differently from maybe the closed source approaches which are common in the security space, this will offer strong foundation to build on top.
So this kind of builds on the past life of people leveraging SE Linux and things like that to try to apply security. What I always found was people would turn it on and then try to do something and then just immediately turn it off because it was too challenging.
Yeah.
And it was the whole disallow policy rather than the whole build policy around what we're comfortable allowing. And it's interesting to see Sysdig continue to morph in. So you mentioned anomaly detection, which will probably lead into some machine learning stuff you're going to work on in the future, I can only imagine, to be able to be more predictive. When I first learned about Sysdig, we really needed a solution for container monitoring. And then we understood the lower level, we started to look, okay, they have a security play here as well. There's probably lots of stuff on top. Do you see the industry changing a little bit now where they're coming to you guys for the security solution first? Or is it still kind of, we know Sysdig, or we're having a conversation around monitoring, oh, and by the way, you should be thinking about container security. Because what I find a lot of people aren't thinking about container security from day one. They're in such a rush to get it in. They're grabbing images off Docker Hub, they're running them, and most of those images are full of vulnerabilities. They run as root, so immediately you're off to a problem when you get to production. So do you see the security side being more of a front and center, and then the monitoring being more of a complementary, or are they both kind of growing up to different people?
So philosophically, again, I keep going back to our background in packets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about network packets. Network packets are just a very powerful, rich unit of information, right? On top of network packets, you can build routers, firewalls, monitoring tools, anomaly detection systems, load balancers. I can keep naming stuff, but that's still the unit, right? And what is more important for you as an operator of an infrastructure or as a developer? The firewall or the monitoring tool? They're both important, right? Actually, they're important together because you cannot really operate with any of these, right? And typically nowadays, they're also integrated because the monitoring gets information from the firewall and vice versa. The firewall can get information from the monitoring to take decisions. So, is security or monitoring more important for Sysdig? Extend the example that I did with packets, and it's very much the same with system calls. With system calls, you can build, like a monitoring, anomaly detection system, forensics, troubleshooting, firewalling, and protection. All of these functions can be built on top of the platform that we have, with the difference that now the data set is 10 times richer because it's not only packets anymore, but you can see actually what the user does inside the machine, right? Something like that. So we really see a balance between our monitoring side of the product line and the security side of the product line, and we really see a very, very strong complementarity and also like a commonality of use cases. The advantage of having a single agent and a single backend for the product, and and then being able to have all of these functions is really remarkable in modern environments where you cannot really go and add 25 sidecars to every container just because you need security, troubleshooting, forensics, and everything else, right? So Sysdig brings a benefit by bringing all of this together, and then there's a workflow benefit.
But that creates a challenge too, right? So that's the engineer in them right there with all the possibilities. Knox obviously is thinking, okay, I have X amount of developers, Sysdig's growing greatly, but how do you focus? Like I've done a startup before we did Arctiq, and we had a couple different areas that were really taking off, but we had to make some tough decisions and decide, okay, this one we really need to double down on, because if you try to do 10 things, you're really going to be mediocre at all of them. But if you double down on 2 or 3 or whatever, so how do you guys balance, or not? How do you balance the developers and the engineers saying, wake up in the middle of the night, I can add a new feature, it'll be compelling, but at the same time, you gotta keep your roadmap, you gotta meet product demand, and everything keeps changing every month or so here, and especially with open source, you don't have 2 years of runway to be able to nail a solution. You gotta go to market quick.
Yeah, and that's the $1 billion question. Is like, how do you actually prioritize stuff? So one of the things Loris touched on was the operator and who's operating this Kubernetes cluster. And we've really seen Kubernetes as officially enterprise when Gartner comes out with a title of the person who's running Kubernetes. And what we're really focusing on are how can we build tooling and workflows for that cluster operator. And the cluster operator is in charge of the health of the cluster, the security of the cluster, and then providing tools to the different teams that operate on that cluster. So really everything that we're building is around that operator lens, and how can we make an organization and that operator successful with Kubernetes.
So that's the whole day 2 ops side of all this container stuff, which we find is challenging for everyone, because usually the whole container initiative is being pushed from the development side. We need to go quick, we need to get this new feature out. And then a lot of times in the enterprise side, they're getting handed something, and they may not have been learned it. It's all new tech, they're used to virtualization, so tooling becomes important. Day 2 is always really tough to be able to do, and with that, there's a bridge into test automation and CI/CD pipelines. So where do you see the divides, and where does the developer play a role here? So does the developer play a role in writing security or writing those Falco kind of specs around their application? Or is it more the operations team should put a framework together that they shall live by?
I see a little bit of both, actually. I think that, DevOps, the name itself, ideally means developers in operation, people and tasks converge, right? And
we have a joke that Kelsey Hightower said, and I use it all the time. DevOps is really just group therapy for systems developers, right?
I was talking about the ideal situation. But for sure, there's an opportunity for us as a community to empower the developers more and make them a little bit more part of the equation when it's a matter of security. In the end, they are the ones writing the code. Mm-hmm. And very often, nowadays, doing even more, like assembling infrastructure components and putting maybe middleware together with your code and that kind of stuff. So empowering them and giving them an option to provide input in a way that is more efficient and more intuitive is very important. The SE Linux example that you made before is a very relevant one because SE Linux is incredibly powerful, But what we saw, as an industry, is that it was too hard to deploy and to maintain, and as a consequence, everybody turns it off by default, right? Yeah. So there's a really strong case to make for user friendliness to empower the developers, because it's right, developers don't have time to learn this kind of stuff. So we focus quite a bit on that, both in our open source and in our commercial products. And even Falco tries to, be a little bit more friendly there. But at the same time, yes, we want to empower developers, but also as the community of operators, we want as much as possible to automate things. Like a CI/CD pipelines clearly create a wonderful opportunity to inject security, in the process of writing and delivering your applications in a way that empowers developers by letting them know, there's something wrong from the security point of view of what they do, but without requiring them to do the work on it, right? So this is, in my opinion, a nice area where dev and ops and potentially also the security people can have a common insertion point that is, from a technical point of view, the place for communication and dialogue, right? And there's feedback for the developers, and there's power to control stuff a little bit better from the operation.
Yeah, makes sense. And with this, maybe we'll segue into a quick Istio discussion. You mentioned Istio earlier, I think Knox mentioned it being part of the puzzle here. And it's like the old Docker at the conference where the lines were really long. Now the conference, the Istio talks are really long. So everybody thinks Istio is going to be all things to everyone. There's a tracing component. There's certainly a security component to it. I see a lot of potential, but then I look at the architecture side and wonder, and we talked about sidecars. Are sidecars really going to scale the way, pushing all our packets through them? It also creates a lot more load on our cluster. So where do you guys see Istio? You mentioned fitting into Istio a little bit and making sure you're integrating into that stream, because it's certainly going to be popular. So do you guys see it as a complement to what you're doing with Sysdig? Do you see it with much overlap in the future? I mean, no one's really using it yet.
You're gonna take this one.
All right. So first of all, my first comment is it's still early.
Yeah, for sure.
So at this stage in the development, it's hard to tell for sure. Istio, it's kind of like sidecar network meshes have a huge amount of promise, and they're very interesting. You asked about the sidecars, and there, for sure, I feel like as the Kubernetes ecosystem matures, we will have to start becoming picky with our sidecars. It's clear that you cannot have too many, right? So
well, they're also enforcing it at the daemon set side. You can make sure you have that tool installed and collecting it. With the sidecar side, maybe maybe they can't. What's the enforcement?
It's a bit less natural. So for sure, in terms of Sysdig, the approach that we adopt wants to be a compromise between the sidecar approach and the daemon set approach. Both of them have pros and cons. Definitely from the scalability point of view, I'm seeing many instances. For example, Java monitoring is a very good example. In which when you need to monitor Java containers with a sidecar, you need to have a Java program because you need to fetch JMX, right? And running a Java hello world uses a gig of memory, right?
Yeah.
So that's when sidecars become painful, because if you want to run under containers, multiply this by
double. Yeah, you double your cluster size.
So Sysdig there tries to balance the sidecar approach with the daemon set approach. At the same time, we will have to pick our sidecars, but the network mesh seems definitely one of the ones where people will prioritize. Not leaving without that one. Because then you can do many things, from encryption termination, which can be very handy if you're a developer, to stuff like visibility, and you were asking about being complementary. Definitely, from the visibility point of view, especially when it's a matter of instrumenting, like tracing and all that kind of stuff, we are really looking forward, to stuff like Istio to be deployed in a more broad way, because then it's super cool for us at Sysdig to be able to absorb, the metrics and the signals that Istio or other network meshes will be able to provide in terms of tracing, and just include them in the single pane of glass. So definitely we're watching it very closely, even from the security point of view. There's a lot of complementarity because the sidecar is a good place for enforcement, and when you have a lot of visibility, especially very granular into what's happening, then working together with the sidecar can be very, very powerful. So many points of interest and many points of complementarity between what we do and something like Istio.
Yeah, I think what will be key is the community will turn to guys like you and Sysdig to be able to tell us about the best use cases, right? So people will make up their own, but we don't always know. I think a lot of our customers are looking for people that are opinionated and for the modern vendors to say, here's a use case or here's a business solution. Here's how you leverage our tool. Maybe here's how you leverage Prometheus. Here's a great case for a sidecar. Here's a case where I wouldn't really use it, or here are the options. So for you guys to come out, and obviously you're going to be testing and a leader in that space, so to be writing blogs or telling stories around that. And a lot of people turn to the tech side right away, but what's the use case it's solving? What's the business problem it's solving is super important.
Yeah, and from our point of view, I mean, the value that we can bring is working and having worked with hundreds of Kubernetes users of any size for years, you know. So in a good or bad way, essentially we were exposed and we were part of these, and we've seen this kind of stuff and all the benefits and issues starting, you know, like in 2014 for Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're able to bring these learnings to a broader audience with our products, but also, you know, with our opinions and learnings.
Cool. So maybe just before we wrap up, I see a huge potential in just the whole data aggregation side of this. So as people move more into the services and send more signals into your platform, is there future plans to be able to start to look at the data sets as a mass set and start to build analytics around what's really going on the low level? And obviously from a security perspective, that builds a great anomaly database. You could start to maybe productize stuff like that. Is there anything going on that obviously you can't let all the secrets out?
Yeah.
There's the whiteboard blank, nothing's been going on in this room, but anything that you're thinking about in future, just because there's so much data as anomaly and machine learning comes to bear, if we can all benefit from those data sets, especially from a security perspective, I think it's going to be a valuable thing.
So the official answer is no comment. The unofficial answer is we have realized quite a bit of time ago that not only it's a lot of data, but it's there's an extreme high level of cross-pollination between the massive amount of monitoring data that we ingest in Sysdig Monitor and the highly granular Sysdig events and captures that we capture with Sysdig Secure. And I'm personally involved in a couple of very interesting projects that hopefully we can share with the broader community pretty soon, and they are on the line of what you were describing.
Cool. That's great. That's great to see.
One part we can touch on, aside from analytics, is really there's no such thing as too much data. So there is some work with Falco where we're trying to get additional streams of data into the engine. So in Kubernetes 1.11, the Kubernetes audit API was out in beta. It's now GA in 1.12, and that will allow us to write rules based on really anything that happens with the Kubernetes API. So if you want to start to audit if a user execs into a container or if someone changes your config maps, these are new data streams that you can get into the agent and then write detections based on.
Great. Yeah, I think the other piece of just making it more of a community project will bring the whole sharing piece of people sharing configs and where to start. Because a lot of people are getting into container security, and then you're saying to them, you can do anything. Well, that's great, but give me a baseline of where to start is important to people. So for you guys to provide a baseline, but also just for people to share around the community that, you know, I had this problem, or I had this audit, here's how I got around it. And it's just a little bit of text is all we really need to share nowadays to be able to put a rule in place. So
absolutely.
It's really cool. So maybe we'll finish off. Knox, what are you excited about in the next year that's coming, personally and for Sysdig?
In the next year, so I think on the Kubernetes security side, there's more that's available with pod security policies, network security policy. I'm starting to just see the community learn more about how to use these tools. So I'm really excited about, with Falco, being involved in more of these discussions and how we can kind of enable the core community to meet some of these use cases.
Cool.
Many things, but I would say on the security side, very excited about Falco, excited about the reception that it's getting from the community, excited about the potential that we have in front of us with the tools. Just the beginning, very committed to work on it and come up with cool stuff related to that. On the monitoring side, I would say very excited about the Prometheus trajectory and really excited to be part of that.
Cool. Well, I just want to thank the guys for letting me come into the office today. It was nice chatting with you guys.
That's fun.
Make sure you check out Sysdig.com, and we'll see you all at KubeCon in Seattle come December, I'm sure.
Take care.